Fitness signs.
So today we're going to focus on three main things for our meeting. We want to review with you the information we've been gathering and the analysis that we've been doing so far. We want to talk with you. Oh, yes?
Can I just, this is a formal meeting, so we have
Oh,
to
I'm
do our
sorry.
little
Okay.
formality.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
So, I think that, I'm the chair. Okay, so I'm going to call the meeting of the Civic Center Advisory Committee meeting to order at 4 p.m. on September 10th. And,
I'll do the roll call.
okay, thank you.
Chair Lewis,
Present.
Vice Chair Koya,
Yes.
Steve Dostart, Dee Fisher,
Yes.
Rose Howe,
Here.
Phil Lively,
He's excused.
Clive Merridew,
Here.
Paul Tonelli,
Here.
Councilmember Dobby.
He was here, he just walked out.
Okay. Got a quorum.
Okay, thank you. So now's the time for any public comments, which are only for items which are not on the agenda. Limit of 3 minutes, please. Any members of the public? We have one member who says no. Okay. So I'd like to call for approval of the minutes of the August 12th meeting. Does any member of the committee have any questions or comments about that?
I wasn't here, so I can't.
I will move approval.
Do I have a second? And Rose will make the second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
With one abstention. And so we'll move on to our regular agenda, and I'll turn it over.
Okay, thank you. So as I started to get into, we have three main topics today. Review our data that we've been collecting so far. Go through our plans for the public workshop next week. And then talk about the outreach meetings that are coming up at the end of October and early November. And talk logistics and start getting some of that planning moving. So I wanted to start though by introductions around the room again so we can keep making sure we're remembering everyone's names and you know all of us. So I'll start with our team. I'm Cheryl Lentini, the principal in charge of our team. With me today is Frederick Corman. He's a designer on our project along with Matthew Gaber from MIG, our landscape architect. And Karen Chan is going to be doing graphic recording at our public meeting next week. So we asked her to join us today as we're talking about plans for next week's workshop. She'll help prep the exercises, and you'll see her recording at the meeting. So she's going to be doing the large public meetings, and Lou, who some of you may have met when we interviewed, is going to be doing the small outreach meetings in the homes. So we've kind of divided and conquered with our support on the graphic recording. So can we go around, maybe Paul, start with you so we can just refresh, make sure we know everyone.
Paul Tonelli.
Okay.
Rick Golia.
Elizabeth Lewis.
Dee Fisher.
Rose Howe.
I'm Clive Merridew.
Right.
And
I'm just some chump off the street.
He's a resident.
Okay.
and this is
Okay.
Jim Dobby.
Hi.
Councilman.
Good to see you again. And then today for staff we have
George, Gordon,
Ryan,
And Tom.
Tom. Okay. Did I get everyone I should get? Okay. All right, so let's launch right into what we've been looking at and analyzing. I'm going to turn over to Matthew. He's going to talk about a lot of the things that we've been looking at with the site itself. So he's got several images here that go through some analysis he's been doing. So he's going to just give you an overview of what we've learned about the site. And then if you see or hear anything that sounds like, oh my gosh, you're so wrong, that's the kind of thing we just want to hear today, to see if there's anything that we're unaware of or that we've missed that you know about in terms of the Civic Center site. So Matthew, you want to take it forward, back?
Cheryl. Steve Dostart, member of our committee.
Hi.
Anybody ever here?
Scoot a chair over a little bit so you can see.
No, what line?
Okay, so I always like to think that we get to do the fun part of this. We get to do the colorful, pretty pictures. If you look at the big 11 by 17 colored line, you can get a closer view of the same drawing here. And where we start our process is we walked all around the site, we talked to the Public Works Department, we talked to other departments, and we looked at a lot of kind of large-scale issues that are affecting your site. One of the most obvious you see along the top is a series of crooked lines. That's meant to imply the train and just the impacts of the train. The train has obviously a physical impact from the ground shaking to the sound, and it's also the type of impact that's, it's not like a freeway where it's kind of constant. It's always there, you hear that dull hum. The train is this kind of episodic event, and it kind of wakes you up, and it's there. So it's a very big impact that we definitely want to look at and consider, and we would like your ideas of how to maybe address that, how you feel about it, how it impacts your life and the use of the Civic Center. The big yellow line up above that, that's the train platform. And the use of the train too is obviously an issue. The station is not used as much as it used to be, and so we need to bring that into our consideration. Now moving over just a little to the left, you'll see the train crossing, and that's also obviously another big impact, as an impact on emergency services, how you access the site. It's kind of a choke point, it's a pedestrian crossing point, and so we really need to engage that and look at that, and we see the site extending all the way over to there. Moving a little bit down, that big square oval is, what those ovals are is they're talking about all the intersections. And you have a couple of different intersections throughout the site. All of them are kind of not what the traffic engineers would design if they had their choice. There's a lot of conflicts in there. There's conflicts with how cars move through there, particularly up there at Fair Oaks. There's conflicts with the trains. There's also conflicts with how pedestrians move back into the neighborhoods. There's not clear paths of travel, so it's not really safe for pedestrians to walk through those intersections. And also in terms of wayfinding, it's not really clear when you go through these intersections where you're supposed to go, that you're arriving into a special place. And they're also, part of these diagrams is looking at where we have opportunities to create new things and some of the wonderful things on your site. The next thing I want to kind of focus on is the traffic circulation, how cars move through, and that's shown in orange, those kind of orange rectangular. Once again, the traffic is a bit circuitous through the site. There's not a direct, clear path of travel as where you're supposed to go. It leads to more conflicts with pedestrians, and that's something we really want your input on right now. So from some standpoints, it's actually kind of good because it causes traffic calming. You don't really know where to go. You're forced to go slower. It's got an informal character to it. It's not like a highway, which are designed to speed through. And those are considerations that we want to take into effect as we think about the Civic Center, slowing traffic down, creating a different kind of mood and character to the space. Continuing on circulation, we've highlighted two types of pedestrian circulation. There's the yellow ones you see along the park and right in front of this building, which are established sidewalks and where it's very clear and easy for you to walk through the site. The other circulation is what we're calling pedestrian path of desires, and those are shown in these kind of orange-brown dots right through there. And those are where you want to walk, but there's no sidewalks, there's no clear path of travel. You're having to dodge around plants or park cars and things like that. And those also do relate to some of the existing uses. So if we do, the permit center moves, you don't have the desire to walk across over there anymore through that intersection. But I think you're always going to maintain the desire to get out to Holbrook Park as a pedestrian, as a bicyclist, and the same thing to cross Fair Oaks and get out into that neighborhood, and then to move in these directions too. Some of the other major issues or things that we need to take a look at is the existing radio tower back there. Right now it's pretty discreetly back there, it's screened, but as things start moving around, we're going to have to take a look at that, where that might go. Then looking at some of the spaces that we have, or stepping back just a moment, there's a little kind of light brown dumbbell type of symbol there, and that talks about gateways. And you've already got, right off of Fair Oaks, we've got somewhat of an existing gateway, And that's a wonderful opportunity to really embellish that and do something more with it. It's kind of got a historic quality to it. But there's definitely at either ends of the site opportunities to create more gateways and a sense of entry and a sense of place. Then looking at some of the general spaces, we have in this area we have a large flat area, relatively few trees, it's kind of open, it's paved, there's not many obstructions in there, it's prominent, and that might be a space that we start looking at where we can locate some of the building programs. It's easily developed, you're not going to run into conflict with trees. The trees are all shown in the green, and those are obviously a very significant factor and add a lot to the quality, the visual quality and environmental quality of the Civic Center right now. You can see the majority of them tend to be weighted on this side. There's also really nice stand of trees between this building and the courtyard, the existing courtyard. And they are in fairly good health. A lot of them are native trees, they're oak trees, and they've actually kind of adapted themselves, and they're what we call volunteers. They've just grown there. They weren't planted, they're part of the natural ecosystem, they're alive, they're thriving, and they provide a lot of character and screening for us right now. Another major use is the actual courtyard up against the railroad tracks. That's kind of an odd shaped space, and in discussions with the Public Works folks, it's not their ideal configuration, but there is, the EOC is located up there, and that's a very important resource for the community and for the city, and it's a recently constructed building, so we're going to have to look closely at its use and how it might be adapted. That pretty much covers it for the site analysis. The next thing we want to talk about, and this gets into the public presentation. During the public presentation, we will definitely bring up this existing conditions diagram, and any comments you have on it, please feel free to mark it up on those and give them to me. I have red pens with me. I'm very interested in your ideas and thoughts about if there's anything we missed on the site analysis.
And I know you're going to cover it. It's just, I just think from the get-go, we want to let the neighborhood know that we're sensitive about it. On here, you might just somehow indicate that we're surrounded on three sides by residential homes,
Okay.
and
That's a
we're
good
sensitive
point.
to that.
Yeah, that's a very
Okay.
good point.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the existing entry gateway over here on Fair Oaks. There are pillars there, and I think hopefully somebody mentioned that those pillars, I think, were donated by the ACIL. So I think we want to be sensitive to that, and it might be mentioned because there are still ACIL members that
Oh,
will
thank you.
Right.
No, we were
recognize
quite
that,
aware
and I
of that.
think
Okay, so we will make a note of it.
ACIL is Atherton Civic Interest League. It's not the
Okay.
ACIL. You know what I mean?
ACS.
It's
The
whatever,
ACIL.
right.
it is our
Our, so she was pretty impressed, you know? I
was like,
she's
really?
so impressed.
you got it. Right.
Okay, got it.
Different ACIL.
Still worth
But,
mentioning,
yeah.
noting, and recognizing.
Yes.
Yes.
One thing, yeah, I would say that, you know, at some point, that we may have an electrified railway. I don't know what will
Right.
happen now, but people have promised that if that happens, trains will stop at Atherton Station.
Right.
And if they do, and if there's as many trains as they're talking about, it's going to increase the traffic pattern substantially at that point. I don't know if that makes any difference to what you're saying or not, but it definitely will increase the traffic.
Yeah, and it would make a difference, and so the way we've planned out our work is as we start to generate some of the options in the next several weeks, we will be scheduling a meeting with Caltrain and talking with their engineers to understand, you know, what would they be planning, what would be their expectations of frequency of service and that kind of thing, what demand studies have they done, so that we can get whatever information they can provide us. Again, it still may not really predict the future, but we will be meeting with them once we have a couple ideas going, so we can get real feedback on the impact that their plans might have on Atherton Civic Center. And then we'll see how to incorporate those into the options that we're developing, you know, what's appropriate.
I mean, I think at the moment, it's pretty well been decided.
Yeah.
There will only be a two-track system. If I
Yeah.
remember
Existing
seeing
tracks,
it, sign that
existing
bill today.
Yeah.
So that helps
But
us.
they're talking about, in 2019, which is not so far.
Not so far away.
Right, if they get it electrified,
Yeah.
if they can get the high-speed rail money, if. But, anyway, then that will our station will reopen, and we'll have as many, I think, as 6 stops a day, possibly. I think that's what they're suggesting. So you have the black dashed line as our property boundary, and so it shows that the Caltrain's parking strip is pretty minimal along the track there, right? Whereas we, in our little site plan that our car went, it went the whole parking lot. So that whole parking lot on the other side of Station Lane is, or Dinkelspiel, is not Caltrain's. That's mostly ours.
Their easement is pretty tight to the tracks
Yes.
themselves.
So, but that does not preclude us, I mean, we don't have to keep that as parking spaces over there.
That's a coordination issue with Caltrans.
Yeah, I know that, I know we were talking to the public works director, and that's why they put the edges of their fence in their building right on that easement line. So I'm not sure what Caltrain is expecting to be left clear and how far back. I mean, they have an easement, so you can't build on their easement. But beyond that, that's gonna be part of the conversation with them, as to what they expect that would be maintained. I'm not sure they could demand,
In fact,
so,
But practically speaking,
Yes.
if we have, 6 stops a day and more on the weekend, we're gonna need places for people to park.
There are creative ways of having parking, such as those things with grass growing out of it, and, so.
Exactly.
Leave that up to you guys.
And there's
Yep.
joint use,
Yeah.
at our office, we have joint use
Exactly.
parking with other commercial uses.
yeah.
That the peak hours don't always occur at the same time, so. And thank you for mentioning that, it is it's shown along the top there, it is a big factor.
Yeah.
And we
Right.
definitely want to emphasize that. The rest of the boundaries, you can see it down along this edge, comes down here, jogs up a bit. And actually, this is kind of a surprise to us, but this space right there, there's this big piece of open space.
Wow.
And it,
Right next to the house there.
yeah, exactly. And to a casual observer, that's,
Yeah.
wow, that's what an amenity or something. Maybe we could do something interesting with that.
Well, and I just want to kind of reflect that, even though we have these driving patterns established, I thought that we were going to maybe look at it as a blank slate to
We are.
try our best to
Absolutely.
We are.
mitigate traffic
Yeah.
around the neighborhoods as much as we can, and maybe we can reorient some of these streets.
It helps when you own the streets.
It helps,
Yeah.
yes. So, anyway.
Exactly, and there are, one of the some other things we'll look at is the volume right here, at this
Mhm.
particular, is that heavily used, is it necessary to get full access through there? We're also gonna be looking very closely at the operational needs of the police department. Where is the best place for them to get out? Being close to train tracks isn't always the best spot. It can delay service. And do we really want to encourage the amount of traffic we have down on this end too? We can look at all of those.
Okay.
Yeah, as you'll see in the drawings as we move forward, we definitely, as part of the planning process and the public input process, we're gonna strip away all the things which are not necessary to remain and get it down to the bare bones and let people dream and think big about what they can do in this space. This is another diagram that we're going to use during the public process. And this is basically what we've done is taken a site analysis and toned it all back. And part of this effort will be to say, okay, we want you to start dreaming. Here are some of the constraints that you face, but these are we want you to be able to.
This is addressing the challenges down here. The title just moved from the top to the here.
Sorry about that.
Okay, I figured it out.
try not to trick you too much. But the purpose of this is, once again, to let people to draw on this, to give them a sense of what are the constraints, what they have to work around, and then what they might actually do. And when I step forward, this is actually, I think this will be the most telling document that we have. And this one is what I was just referring to. This is what we call in art, I like to call in architectural world, a tabula rasa. Tabula rasa. Tabula rasa, which means basically a flat table.
Okay.
And this is where you have the ability to kind of really dream and think big. And what we've done is we've stripped away the existing police and civic facilities right here, the permit center, the actual corporation yard, and these are the things that we have to keep. And so the town hall is we have to keep because it's a historic building, the structure is historic. And then we also just showed the piece of the house that's right over there that was historic too.
So who told,
Why do
who
we,
said that was historic?
So the EIR that was put together when the library project was put forward, actually identified the three structures, the train station, this building, and the house portion of the library as having historic value. Once
Not
they're,
historic.
they're not on the register,
Correct.
but because they have been identified having potential historic value, if you want to do anything to them, you have to go through the CEQA process to basically prove out or go through the steps to identify what are the potential significant factors, are there any remaining, what do you propose to do to it, and then make your case for what you propose to do, or how you plan to preserve, remediate, whatever. So it's simply an indication and a reminder to us that any of these three structures, there's a process we need to all be aware of should we choose to do anything to these buildings, other than leave them exactly as they are. So that's why they're kind of there, and when we get to talking about the public workshop, we may play with what this eventually looks like when we craft an exercise. We'll talk with you about that as we get further into the meeting today, but we wanted to make sure everyone was aware that these are on record as being identified as having potential historic value. So they do need to be dealt with in a very state-run specific process, in the
So
CEQA process.
For your information, the library,
It's the
which is
library,
the little
yeah.
house there, I wouldn't put it in the same.
No, it's not.
As the council chambers. here.
No, it's
No,
not.
No, it's
I'm
not.
sure
It's not at all.
that
In
we
fact,
could demolish it if we wanted to.
I think you
Absolutely.
probably can.
Yeah.
I think
And the
that,
size
It's
of plan
seismically a
say,
problem.
oh, exactly. I mean, and I
So-
think it's not gonna take long to state those factors and make an easy case for demolition for that particular structure. I think this one would be considered more significant, and this would be one you'd be hard pressed to wanna demolish.
did it end up as being historic because somebody included it in a report because they made an individual decision?
No, they went through, there was a proper CEQA evaluation in accordance with the state guidelines to identify those structures in the report.
Who
Who
did
did
that?
that?
I don't know who offered
LSA,
it.
the environmental.
Yeah, whoever the environmental
Yeah.
consultant was who prepared
Environmental.
I believe
your
it was
report.
RSA, and if my recollection is correct, it was primarily driven by the age of
Exactly.
the structures.
So
not any
these
type of
days that you're
literature
aware-
shows
More
than
about
50 years
prior
old.
to
Anything that's
the
older than
structure.
50 years old automatically triggers the need to do an evaluation should you choose to do anything to the structure. So that preliminary piece was put into the CEQA report when you did the library analysis, and we would have to take that to our report as well if we propose as part of this master plan doing anything to any of these structures. So it's just, as soon as you hit 50 years old now in California, it triggers the need to do the very most minimal report to assess if there's anything left. Then you keep going through the steps based on what you want to do with it.
And Cheryl, isn't it that, and I'm glad you added that additional information, but ultimately those decisions and having, if you go through the process, are up to the city council
Exactly,
as to
exactly.
disposition.
Yes, it's not, the state, because they're not on the register or anything like that, you actually still have the flexibility to go through the process and as a city council, make your own ruling as to what you want to do about these structures.
Just the process.
Yeah. That is the process.
Okay.
When it's on the federal register or the state register, it becomes a lot more complicated.
Wait, so just to clarify what you said, so does that just mean if you didn't want to include that structure at the same level as the other two structures, that's just a motion for the city council?
Pretty much, once you have all the data in hand.
Still have to do the secret process.
You still have to do the process, you still have to have all your data to act upon, but you can make a motion and a ruling
But
that,
what is that, is that data a 200-page document, or is it?
in that,
some
for that
simple-
building, I think it's gonna be pretty small.
It's a small section of
Yeah.
the larger environmental
Yeah.
report, and the council would have to make findings
Yes.
that would say, and, whereas, and for the following reasons, we hereby determine that the building,
Right.
even though it has some historical significance, is no longer worth retaining. And even with the others, I think you mentioned in your report that the historical parts are largely the exterior.
Exactly.
Now, with the train station, it's
That
almost
might be
all
more
exterior,
so.
but for this building,
Yeah.
retaining the exterior walls and roof and windows are the important part,
Right.
and even
The
then, it's
inside
more
they
the
wouldn't
front
care.
than the back, and inside you have the flexibility.
But it's
So-
very common when faced
Yeah.
with this, there are many consultants out there, when you work with your environmental consultant who will do the CEQA report for this master plan, they will either do or they will commission someone to do the analysis, find the facts that say the state of the condition of the building, how much the historic fabric remains, what significance it still does or doesn't have. That'll give you the data to make your findings and recommendations and set a motion as to how you want to act upon it. And I don't think it's going to be a major issue for you to be able to do whatever you want to do, but we want to make sure that you're aware of all these factors. So as we go through the process, you're not kind of like, what's this about? Why is this here? Why are you even considering it?
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
at this point, none of these buildings have been determined to be actually historic.
No, they've been indicated as having potential historic significance.
So in any of the public plan sets and documents, could we change it from existing historic buildings to potentially historic buildings or
Yeah,
something like that?
we'll work on that.
Sure.
Yeah, you're
That would
right.
be helpful.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
hate to bring up this question, but I thought as part of the EIR process for the library, even hinted at the town, at that structure being, having possible historic value. And I'm
The old
hoping
town
that that's been erased.
It wasn't in the report we saw in the final report, so,
Well, I think because it was built in the 60s.
yeah, so then you'd
That's
be
50
just
years
on,
now.
you'd be so close.
Quick, tear it down.
Can we take it down right now?
Hurry!
Let's hope it was the late 60s.
Let's throw up some demandables,
Quick, now, before someone notices.
Pretty soon our portables will be historic as well.
I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but we work with a lot of like higher ed institutions and whatnot who are now facing this. Like, UC Berkeley has all these mid-century modern buildings, which, they're terrible energy sucks, they're a maintenance nightmare, they're falling apart, they have seismic issues. And now they have to go through a process on every one that they want to touch. So, yeah, no, it's certainly a big deal that, California has made this ruling that anything 50 years and older must be part of any CEQA process if you want to do anything to it, to evaluate it first.
The other thing I would like to say is, heritage trees can be removed.
Yes, they can.
It isn't that we may want to do it, but I don't want it to be black and white. If you come up with a plan that really looks good, that you don't do it because you don't think you can move ahead.
Yeah, and that's, if I may, I just wanted to talk a bit about the trees. I apologize, this didn't make it in here, but the trees, there's been an arborist report, and it looked very closely at all the trees. And there are some, like this one, this guy in particular, is right at,
By the train station?
exactly, and that's a gateway tree, that's a significant tree, but it's also had some heavy pruning, and there's been broken branches, and then if the grade gets changed underneath them, they start to rot. I'm sure you all are familiar with these issues, and so the trees that some of them are thriving, some of them are somewhat compromised. And we can go through and identify that for you. We haven't right now because we wanted to be very sensitive about the tree issue and to get a sense from you about how we should approach that. There's a lot in this parking lot in particular that are smaller trees, they're not of great value, those could easily be removed, and they don't meet your preservation requirements.
Could some be relocated? I mean, if they were thriving in it.
If they're small enough, the problem is when you relocate them, you take a basic giant claws like this and you rip them out of the soil, and for some reason a tree doesn't like that.
I don't know, Stanford does a great job of doing
Yeah,
that. I mean, have you
yeah.
seen their tree lot on Oak Camino there?
Yeah, I mean, you can do it at great expense. It's usually more cost effective just to get a new tree and bring it in. And then just one last thing before I turn it over. You can see really clearly here, this is the building we're in right here. Here's a historic building, and then, or the old house, and then here's the library. So you can see how this chunk could easily be removed, and you're just left with these two pieces right there.
I think when you make a presentation, we want to be very sensitive to the tree issues.
Yes.
And people will probably not want to hear that there's a possibility of removing a lot of trees, but at this point in time, we don't know. We've evaluated them all, and of course, we'll be looking at them all
Yes.
carefully and providing new trees if we have to remove trees, just
Right.
like anybody in the town will.
It's a safety issue. We would only,
And that's gonna be some of what we'll test at the workshop as well, because we wanna make sure that we kind of get those thoughts out from people. You know, well, we assume the trees are really important and you're gonna be crushed if we remove a single one. But we wanna make sure we open that dialogue as much as we can at the public workshop, so that we really help educate them while we're there, but then also hear the feedback of, you know, well, if they start to understand that perhaps some trees may not be that healthy or may have to be removed because of the master plan scheme that's adopted, you know, what are the most important trees to them? Do they have a special tree? Are there some that they really just want at all costs to see preserved? So we'll try and get at some of the nuances at the public workshop, see if people will kind of speak up, who knows? But, you know, those are the types of things we're gonna try and pry out of people next week, so.
I should point out that the tree inventory was done actually prior to them starting
Yes, so we
by
had
the
it
town
in, yeah.
arborist, and all the trees are numbered,
Yep.
they are identified, and their conditions, their current conditions are evaluated. So
Yep.
we have a baseline from which
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah, we've got good information, which is great.
good job.
Okay, so, the next thing I wanna do is update you on where we are on data collection for developing the amount of space needed in each of the facilities. So, we just received the library draft yesterday, so thank you, library committee, for pushing that along, we appreciate it. And we understand it's a draft and that you're still working with your architect to make sure that it's all refined in what you want, so, but it gave us a good sense of something to at least look at as a plug.
You use the word architect, and.
I'm sorry.
It's the
Library.
working with the needs assessment.
Needs
Person,
assessment.
I know, but
What should I
Dee
call
felt that it was,
Consultant.
that we had hired an architect.
We didn't have money to hire
We
them,
had
so
not,
I'm not worried.
Okay, so working with your program consultant,
Okay.
we saw that you have a draft. Right now, we plugged it in kind of as a placeholder, but it does give us, you know, something to start to see the magnitude for the whole picture. We have not completed a program with the police department yet. And so one of the things we're finding is that we're pretty much starting from scratch on that program. Whereas with all of the others, for the city management offices and public works and whatnot, we basically have been able to take the 2012 program forward pretty successfully. You know, you'll see as I go through it in the summary, some of the things that we found were not accounted for and what we want to talk about today. And then as we talk to each user group, again, some overlaps with, you know, a lot of expressed sort of meeting space needs and that type of thing. But other than that, we've been able to pretty well bring forward the 2012 program information for the city offices. With the police, it's very different. We're finding that the program that was developed was missing, it was just missing so many essential spaces for a basic police department to be able to function and comply with all the regulations and operational requirements that they have to have. And so Beverly has been working with Ed and his department to essentially start over and go through their operations, go through the pieces that are missing and begin to put them back in and talk with the department on how they operate, what are the types of services they are providing, what does that drive in terms of their physical space needs? So where we are now is Beverly has developed a draft. I know you guys were talking today. We need to come back, probably have another session working directly with the police department as they're reviewing the draft. Then we want to have another meeting, probably with, including the city manager and Gordon and the police department, to actually then sit down and kind of go through and vet it. And so we're not really at a point where we can go through that program in any detail with you today.
Cheryl, can you remind us, does your firm, have you done a lot?
Oh, yeah.
Police departments,
Police and sheriff.
the internal space planning?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes, many, many facilities.
Great.
So, and that's why, I mean, we could recognize that what was in the 2012 program was really not a functional police station. So our challenge now is to really get in and understand their operations and the services that they're providing so that we really actually understand what kind of space they need. So we're kind of midstream in that process. So we really have had to start from square one, and that's gonna take another week or so to really get through that, maybe a couple more weeks. And we wanna go through that internally with staff to make sure that we are clear, that we've heard everything correctly, that we've processed it correctly, brought our expertise to the table, and been able to pull it all together before we come back and say it's this or that in terms of square footage needs. So that's our overall status on the programming and the data collection for the space requirements.
Cheryl?
Yes.
And Madam Chair, before you move on, later on the agenda is the library ad hoc committee item under ad hoc committee reports and recommendations. At that point, I think Gordon's got some information and the ad hoc committee may have some information. They want this committee to validate the results of Brian Cox's study
Yeah,
in
that'd
order
be
to
great.
provide the city council at the September 18th meeting with a report and adoption of that number.
Yeah, and so that's why right now we just have it as a placeholder until you approve it.
Is there a number associated with that for square footage?
Yes.
Yes.
And
That's our
we're gonna
report.
discuss it later.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
that's our report.
Okay.
Cheryl, can I ask a question
Sure.
too? Can we go over this, just briefly, this program summary, just to get an understanding
Yes.
of it? The DGSF, that's your square footage that you,
No, so let me
What is-
I'll go through kind of column by column. So, and I think in the final program, we may take out that there's two columns here, because essentially what we found across the board is growth is not predicted in this town. So the
Well, we
space
don't know if
needs.
we're gonna be able to afford growth.
Exactly.
So-
So, the 2012 program
These
pretty
girls
much indicated
staff
that